Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Chole Miranda is the sommelier at Birdie G's restaurant in Santa Monica, California. Now, Birdie G's is one of our favorite restaurants, not just because the food and wine is amazing, but because they use a significant percentage of organically grown ingredients and feature many wines grown organically or better. I'm just going to say it. Chole is my favorite sommelier. She's a consummate and egoless professional, asks great questions before trying to suggest a wine, offered us tastes of multiple wines so that we could sample before committing, and generally put us at ease with the entire wine selection process. When Chole is our host, we always end up drinking more wine than we thought we would, which I think would also make Chloe's bosses happy too. The other thing that I like about Chole is that she's self-taught and has not gone through the traditional certification process to get to become a sommelier. In this interview, she discusses some of the pros and cons of taking this path and how she continues to educate herself about wine. We also talk about some of the market trends with regard to organic wine, some of Chloe's perspectives, and the tips and tricks and secrets that have helped make her a successful sommelier. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. The sponsor for today's episode is Centralis Wine. That's Centralas Wine. You can learn more about Centralis at centraliswine.com, and full disclosure, Centralis is my winery. I started Centralis because I noticed a disconnect between the values that many wine drinkers have and the kinds of wine they choose to drink. I wanted to give those of you who love wine an option to buy wine that reflects your values. So Centralis is built on two pillars. The first is that Centralis wine will always be made with, at minimum, organically grown grapes. And the second is that we will always tell you every ingredient that was added during winemaking. Our first vintage will be released very soon. In fact, it may be available by the time you hear this. And it's pretty limited, so if you want to get some, please go to our website, centraliswine.com, and sign up for our wine list. Or go ahead and buy wine. That's Centralas wine.com. We're also on Instagram at Centralis Wine, and I can't wait to share our wines with you. Chloe, thank you so much for joining me and doing this. This is really great to have you, and I can't wait to hear your perspective on
Yeah,
things.
so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So your job is a sommelier, and right? Just want to clarify that for the record.
That is correct.
So I'm sure it's been an interesting time for you during this pandemic. Let's talk about normal time. What is your job normally? What do you see as your job, and what is the reality of your job? What do you want it to be, and what is it?
Well, the reality, I guess, simply put, is to sell wine and as much of it as I can for the restaurant.
Great. I
Yeah,
love it. You're my hero.
yeah, which is an awesome job, and I'm so grateful, and it's amazing. I think going deeper into that, I think the ways to be successful in selling wine is to, get the right style of wine at the right price point in front of people, and that, it's a delicate dance. It's about creating a good rapport. It's about knowing what your chef is cooking too, so that these pairings are on point. I think that ultimately wine is a source of elevation for a dining experience, and that's something I'm really passionate about. I'm so lucky to work with an amazing chef who makes such dynamic and interesting food, and the pairings are always so surprising. So I think that definitely is an added bonus if you're working with that as well. Um,
And do you go through the menu with wine in mind? Like, do you go line by line through the menu and say, okay, we have this wine, I think that would be great, or these wines I think would be great with this dish? Or is it more, you do that? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and our sous chefs and chef are so great about instructing us and allowing us to taste. And so at 5 o'clock when we open, we'll taste whatever new dish is up, and I will bring ideas based on the ingredients that I know that are in it. And it's so funny because oftentimes I'm wrong because it sounds like
Mm,
it's going to be this super heavy dish and it ends up being really like bright and light. And so that's really fun for me is when
mm,
I get surprised.
that's nice. Well,
Yeah,
and maybe we're jumping right into this, but let's talk about some pairing. Like
sure.
what are some things that you've found that surprised you, and what do you use? I mean, what are some guidelines that you've used or that you could pass on to people, or even just ideas to pass on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain pairings that are classic. So, we have a dish that has truffle butter and duck confit and mushrooms. And, like, of course, I'm going to put burgundy next to that, right?
Mm,
But then we have
mm,
dishes like this beautiful lamb loin, and everyone's like, oh, lamb, Syrah for sure. But it's marinated in beets and molasses, and there's saffron yogurt and dill. And so you have all these bright
mm.
flavors and you have all this acidity from the yogurt that you don't want to drown it with an intense Syrah. So I bring a Syrah rosé that's a little full bodied, maybe with some age on it. And it is mind blowing how perfect it is. And people look scared when I bring it to them. But then I pour a taste for them. And they're like, okay, I get it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Gosh, I could get hungry already. It's
I'm sorry.
lunchtime, and no, I love it. I love it. Well, let's also say, where do you work?
Oh, yeah. That's probably pretty important. I work at Birdie G's in Santa Monica. Our chef is Jeremy Fox, the acclaimed
And
Fox. Yeah.
it's part of a bigger group, right? The Rustic Canyon
Yeah.
restaurant group, is that right?
We're part of the Rustic Canyon group, obviously, Rustic Canyon being our flagship restaurant. We also own Esther's, which is our wine bar and restaurant, Cassia, which is a Thai restaurant. We have Milo and
Mm.
Olive, which is Italian. So yeah, we're a pretty big group. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So I know from Rustic and Birdie G's that there's this emphasis on organic ingredients, farm to table. Is that throughout the restaurant group, or is that just those two restaurants? And talk about a little bit what that is, how that's managed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it got to a point where yes, the entire restaurant group, sort of works with that in mind. We promote small farmers who are typically farming organically as well, and we pride ourselves on using as many organic ingredients as we can. And so it got to a point where it was like, well, if this is how we source our ingredients for food, this is absolutely how we should be sourcing wine and beverage.
Mm.
It was kind of a no-brainer. And these are questions that we get from our guests often. So we realized there was a demand for it. People are asking for organic wine. They're asking about sulfur intake and levels and things like that. And so I think it was a natural progression for us. The way we manage it is we're definitely very vocal with the reps that we work with, and we let them know, we're only going to be purchasing wine that is 100% farmed organically. We don't require certification because, that can get difficult and expensive depending on the size of the producer. And so practicing organic is totally fine as long as we know for sure they're not using chemicals. And then we really like to promote winemakers that are going above and beyond and doing biodynamic farming, regenerative, no-till, dry farm, things like that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's really important to us.
that's very cool. You sound very knowledgeable about that.
Oh,
Um, I mean, I just wrote an article about practicing organic but not certified, and the whole practicing organic thing. And I've definitely, as a winemaker, went in looking for grapes, run into people who will use organic as a keyword, and then when I dig in, I'm like, you are not organic at all. Like, I don't even know why you're using that other than just to get my attention, which you did obviously, which seems a little dishonest. So
that's
how do you, when you sorry, go ahead, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say that's definitely a part of the conversation, when we're talking with our reps, when they bring us, different wines to taste and we ask, it's definitely a conversation that has to be had with the producer and an honest one,
Yeah.
because a lot of times we're told, yeah, it's organic, but or they'll say the big thing we were running into is we were being told it's sustainably farmed. And
Oh, yeah.
what does that mean exactly? Like what is
That's a
it?
great question.
Yeah, what that's the conversation that we've been having a lot. It's like, okay, but I don't know exactly like that is different for every producer.
Yeah. There is certified sustainable, which means something, but when people say sustainably farmed, it's pretty meaningless, I've found.
Yeah,
It,
exactly.
I mean, sustainable can be about business practices, it can be about the way you treat your employees, and it could be about
Mhm.
farming, and yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could mean, like, maybe you use compost in your fertilizers and your soil. I don't
Right.
yeah, so when we make this promise to our guests, we want to ensure that we're not lying to them, you know? So anytime we taste, we really dive into the farming practices to make sure that we're all on the same page so that I'm not telling a guest that something's organic and it's not.
Wow, that I mean that adds a little layer of extra legwork, it seems like,
Yeah, but it's
to
really
the
rewarding.
buying process.
Yeah, it is definitely, and we're so fortunate to work with reps that understand this about us, and so they do the digging, and so when they come to us,
That's great.
you know, it's done, and they have so much knowledge to impart on us, which we really appreciate. Um,
That's great. I in my article, there's something maybe be useful to you. It's called a pesticide use report. That is, California has this amazing tradition going back to I think the 50s, where every agricultural producer has to report every pesticide that they use every year, in what amount and on what area and on what crop. And there's, like, I think the database goes back to the 70s that they started tracking it. So you can literally pull up every producer's records of the pesticides that they've reported using over, up until, today, basically,
wow, I did
through
not know
publicly available records in California. So it's a great resource. It's a little difficult to find the information.
that.
I mean, I've given some helpful links and some shortcuts on that article that I did. I'll tell you about it later. I'm not trying to promote the article or anything. I
No,
just
no,
really
I
think it would be useful in your position to know about this. And that's why I'm trying to get the word out about it, because I didn't know about it until recently either. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, first of all, congratulations, California. Second
wow,
of all, why aren't we telling more people about it? It's really a great resource to check up and see who's being honest and who's not.
absolutely. And who does the reporting? Like, the producer has to report it?
So the producer does the reporting. That is a weak point, in that you could lie,
Right.
you could misreport or underreport, or just not report something you've used.
Mhm.
But generally, if you do that consistently, there are ways that you can get caught, and so it's not worth it. I mean, the stakes are, the stakes, the benefit to lying probably doesn't give you that much advantage versus the penalty of being found out,
True.
because they can track sort of your business expense
Mm.
receipts and things like that, and also just like if they start seeing anomalies, like, you did just these things you only sprayed these things on 1,000 acres, that's interesting. That seems
Yeah,
really light,
that's great.
um
I
so
definitely check that out.
yeah, yeah, no, it's really cool. I'll tell you about it. But anyway, my point being, I think that's great that you guys have that effort and emphasis to dig into that. And I agree. There is a cost to doing
Mhm.
organic and biodynamic farming, and I know some people just choose not to get certified, but are legitimate in that they have very strong values. They would never put any synthetic chemicals or step outside the bounds of organic or biodynamic, but they just don't get certification. So but
Yeah,
you do have to be careful because other people use it for marketing purposes.
right.
I I digress, though. Going back to Birdie G's, which is one of my favorite restaurants, I have to say, and where I met you, which I'm glad I did.
Love that.
You were fantastic and tasted some great wine and had that Alsatian dish that was like sauerkraut with like five different things that you guys make, like,
Yeah, the choucroute
the
royale,
sh-
I believe
that was it.
it's
Yes. And it wasn't even on the menu the last time I went because it was so big, I think. It was like you could only have it with like three people.
Yeah, but
Um,
you guys crushed it because 'cause you're awesome.
we were very hungry. And I think it was more that we wanted to drink the wine and we just had to have something to eat it with.
Yes, and I always
But
look forward to when you guys came in, even before I knew you were a winemaker, because you always wanted to try really fun stuff, and those are my favorite interactions, of course.
Yeah, I love, well, I mean, and don't get me started. I'll geek out on wine for too long and you'd never be able to get to your other customers. But but that does bring up the question. You mentioned that, customers were asking about organic and stuff. I assume that the emphasis came naturally and that it wasn't a result of just customer feedback and customer queries that drove you to say, hey, we need to have this emphasis on, organic, local, biodynamic, or better farming in both the food and the wine. But to what extent do you get those questions from your customers, and to what extent does that inspire changes in what you do? And have you seen trends of that increasing?
Yeah, I think, our restaurant group being based in Santa Monica, Santa Monica is a very environmentally conscious city.
Yeah,
They banned plastic straws and plastic in general and, things like that. So, w- because of that, I feel like our customer base is definitely very conscious about the environment. And I think another reason we wanted to move toward organic farming is in our wines is because it is better for the environment. I think it just goes hand in hand with our company's values too. Um, and yeah, I think we were getting that question all the time. And but more so, I think as a company, we really wanted to move in that direction anyway. And so it was really nice to be able to have a product for them that we felt really good about and that we're really excited about. I think once people started learning about egg whites being used for clarification in wines, I think we got a lot of questions about, vegan wine and things like that.
right.
We wanted to have a couple of those around. That way we had something for our vegan guests, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've noticed a lot of questions about like sulfites, which, I have my own opinions about, but I definitely have, a good amount of, no sulfur added wines for those guests that are, made really elegantly and they're not too like, barnyardy or funky or anything. But so that's been nice to have that for the guests. So yeah, I do think there was a market for it, and
Yeah.
we get that question often.
I
Uh,
mean, I guess one, I guess the behind the question that I'm asking is, do customers have power? Like, do consumers have the power to change, business and shape the way that business is operating in terms of, you know, you know, providing organic options and things like that?
I think yes, for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we are selling them a product, and we want there to be demand for it. So I wasn't a part of the decision to go fully organic, unfortunately. So I can't really attest to sort of the birth of that, but
Right.
I have to assume that it had something to do with the demand from the customer. But also, I really think the environmental impact was important to us as well. And we have a lot of buying power. There's 5 restaurants buying wine, so if we're supporting these smaller producers, I think that is a huge impact in kind of the trend of organic farming and wine too. Supporting that and knowing that there are buyers out there that are going to have interest in it.
Yeah. What questions do you think customers should be asking when they're coming in?
Hmm. I- that's a good question. I do agree that questions aren't being asked as much. I think it's hard to develop trust with the customer, right?
Hmm.
It's their first time. They have no idea who you are. They know what they like, so they order fire things that they're used to, that they know that is fail safe. And so my goal is always to have a friendly, non-judgmental approach, so that if I do say, hey, this is the style of wine that you like. I have something that's really like new and interesting. Let me put it in front of you and see what you think.
Hmm.
That's really where I try to go. And then the questions arise from that because they're like, oh, she's taking an interest in my experience. And I want to know more about this. And so the I guess the questions that I would like people to ask is, what should I drink? What's good with this? but I understand as a consumer, it is hard to trust, especially if you've never been somewhere before, that they're not just going to pour you a $30 glass of Cabernet, you know? So I try to
Well,
create that approach of, of to inspire that trust, essentially.
and I imagine you've learned a thing or two about how to build that trust, like how to be a good sommelier. What are the techniques that you use to do that?
Yeah. And I guess the way to answer that is I, I don't really present myself in an intimidating way. I try to be really genuinely I'm very enthusiastic about what I do. And so I think people are drawn to that. I think I go into it, I'm not stuffy, I'm not judgmental. I really am trying to get them something that they like. And I never make them feel stupid for not knowing something, which I think happens a lot. And I
Yeah.
think it's helpful that I don't really like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I think there is this general misconception about what a sommelier is and how they are. And I just think I'm a little different. And so I think
Ooh,
that
well, let's get it. I mean, I will say you're one of my favorites, if not my favorite, because of the way that you approached us. I mean, you didn't, yeah, you absolutely were not, did not come with an off-putting manner. Your energy was very welcoming. And in fact, I think you started with questions. You started asking us about our likes and preferences and things like that to just draw us out. Of course, we're total wine sluts, so we love everything, so I made your job hard, but that approach, I think, must be what works well. It must be one of the secrets, because I think, my response to it is always, oh, I finally found somebody who, gets it. Like, they're not trying to present something to me. They want to, it's immediately when you ask a question, it's not judgmental. You're trying to find out something about somebody. You're not trying to give them something, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
ultimately, I just firmly believe that wine is for everybody, and I really, there's a lack of education in wine in our culture in general, so I never want someone to feel like wine is above them or out of their reach, because it just takes a couple of facts to learn, what works for you, like, and so I try to bring that to people. Uh,
So what kind of things do you look for? Like, what are the, because I imagine you have to translate a little bit when you're asking people these questions and they say, "Well, I like this or I like that." What are some, you know, things that flag things in your mind? Like, they say this and that means this. Like, what do you listen for?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will typically compare to varietals they're very used to. So they'll say, I usually like Pinot or
Uh-huh.
I like Malbec. And that tells me uh, usually everything I need to know. I mean, it tells me they like light bodied, low tannin. If they like Malbec, they like big fruit, they like extraction. So that definitely helps. Uh,
Right.
and then I will sort of press and say, because there is a big difference between American style wines and European
Yeah.
style wines. So that's usually my next question. And if that feels like it's going a little above their head, I'm like, let me just get something in front of you. That's always
Yeah.
my tactic, because when someone can taste, obviously they
Th-
develop their opinion right away, and it doesn't feel over their head because it's in front of them. They're looking at it. It's sensory.
Do they, I mean, and you get that immediate reaction, which then tells you everything. Do you find, I mean, I guess I will go back and from our experience, I think your response is really good. I mean, your response to that is very informative as well, because it's you are taking a beat, interpreting it, and then saying, "Great, then I think you'll really like this." There's no, again, like, "Oh, okay," like like, again, no judgment came
Right.
across.
And a lot of
Um,
times I can get a sense of, and I'll even ask this sometimes, do you like more classic style wines, or are you interested in something a little off the beaten path or adventurous? And that
mm,
usually piques interest as well. Of like, oh, you know what? Let's try something that I've never had before. Or that's typically the conversation. that happens, and it's pretty illuminating, and I don't need to really be like, well, do you prefer, like, I don't have to be like stuffed with like, that's plenty of information for me to work with.
I imagine you have to be careful about the language that you use.
For
You
sure.
clearly know a lot and could just break down a wine like in the way that any critic would, or any sommelier to trying to pass some large exam would do a blind tasting. But I'm sure that that's not very helpful for the customer. So
No, like, I'm never gonna say, "It tastes like gooseberries." Like, nobody in America knows what a gooseberry tastes like, I'm sorry. They just don't. And
yeah.
so no, I think the more useful terms are like, is it fresh? Is it unoaked? Is it, things like that. Is it bright? Is it youthful? People can understand that uh,
Mhm.
much more than, those sort of really specific tasting notes. Because if they've never, you know, tasted a watermelon radish before, they're not going to know that it tastes like watermelon radish. So I try to
Uh,
keep it really like, I don't want to say easy, but I try to keep it understandable and tangible for them.
yeah. Yeah, like, and there is like a bit of translation because every subculture has its own insider language,
Right.
and there's that's unavoidable. But you always, I imagine, have to have that part of your brain that's like, if I never, if I'm new to wine or whatever, if I'm not part of that subculture of like the wine industry, what does that sound like to me when I say whatever? What are some of the terms that you that are in vogue that make you laugh or annoy
Oh gosh, I don't know. Annoy me.
you? I,
um,
I've noticed that crushable is a big one lately. Smooth is another
yeah,
one. I guess
more
smooth can work though. Is that
funny.
overused?
Yeah, smooth is used a lot by the guest, and they just mean soft, right? Like soft,
Right.
and they want,
Absence of strong tannic
or
impression.
yeah, lower acidity, exactly.
Right.
I don't know if there's anything that like bothers me. Uh,
Okay. No, it's all
I
right.
think it's because I've just tried to be so patient when it comes to that. Like because I'm trying not to be sort of stuffy, I guess. I try to like let everything roll off,
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, that makes sense.
Let's see. Maybe it'll come to me.
No, that's all right. But you did say a few leading things that I would love you to talk more about. So, like, how does one become a sommelier? Like, what do you need to, how did you get the skills that you have? I mean, clearly you have a way with people, which is the people skills seems like a big part of it. And maybe the biggest part, like, how important, I mean, obviously you got to know the wine that you're talking about. You got to know something about wine. How
Right.
did you get all that, and what do you think somebody needs? Let's say you're talking to somebody who's interested in becoming a sommelier. What are,
Yeah,
or just in general?
I think the first thing to identify are what are your goals in that? Because there can be so many different ways to do this, which is so great because I think in the past there was one linear route, and now we're seeing that there are a lot of different ways to do this. And so I think if your goals are to run a wine program at like a Michelin starred restaurant, maybe
Hmm.
you should go through the court and do things and become a master sommelier. That maybe is your path. Um, I think for me, I was very unconventional in my path here. And you're right. I think connecting with people and realizing that wine does that was kind of the moment that I realized this was for me. Um,
How
I
were you unconventional? Sorry, if you continue your thought, but then I'm just curious, when you say unconventional, what did you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm mostly referring to certification. I'm not a certified sommelier. I have taken
Mm.
formal classes, but I never felt like becoming a master sommelier was really my dream.
Mm.
Um, and that's what I mean. I think most people that do set out to be a sommelier want to be the best, and so they aim for that
Hmm.
master sommelier title. Whereas and maybe I'll get there. I don't. Who knows? But as of right now, that doesn't really seem to be my path. I think I started out at a prominent restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, and I was a server there. And it was a very dynamic wine program that changed, or by the glass wine list that changed just about every day. And so the standard for us as servers, we were expected to know the wines by the glass very well. And so that was my introduction pretty much into wine, because I wanted to be the best. And so I studied every single one and I wanted to know everything. And soon I started to realize that we weren't just selling booze. It was more than that. It was, as you know, it was history and language and culture
Mm.
and science and climate and geography. And that really opened the doors for me. And I felt a connection. And I
That's
loved,
cool.
yeah, I loved how wine brought people together, because it did in my family. My family is from Spain. And so that was a staple at our dinner table. So anyway, I after a few years working at that restaurant, I was like, you know what? I think this is for me. I'm gonna try this out. And so when Birdie G's opened, I was the floor sommelier. So I was a server, but on a few nights, I was the floor sommelier essentially. And that's when I started taking classes. I took some WSET classes, and I just immersed myself. I wanted to know everything. And so I just absorbed as much information as I could. And luckily, Catherine Coker, who's the wine director for the Rustic Canyon Group, she doesn't require certification for these positions. As long as you have the knowledge and you know what you're doing, then that's all that matters. And at the
And
restaurant in Los Angeles, the wine director there is not certified either, so he didn't require that as well. So I think there is like kind of a new frontier for that.
it's an ongoing process, the learning process as well.
Oh,
I mean, every year there's new wines and new things to learn and new stories and
and
everything else too, right?
that's another thing that drew me to it, is that it was a never-ending journey of knowledge, and I it'll never be boring ever. And
How do you, I mean, obviously you're exposed to a lot of great information just by virtue of your job.
yeah.
Are there other ways that you try to continue your education?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely refer to my wine Bible often, as most do.
Yeah.
Anytime, and because there are so many, AOCs, and
Oh yeah.
you'll even the people that pretty much know everything don't. And so it is a constant reference, as you're learning. So yeah, I definitely refer to that. I try to stay current on what's going on too. I read online publications. I love Eric Asimov's New York Times column. I read that all the time. And then when I'm like
Yeah.
teaching, like because I have to teach the staff, I really like Wine Folly. Madeline Paquette, she's
Oh
so
yeah.
great at breaking things down in a way that really is just very easy to translate to people. And she's a graphic designer, and I think
The visuals.
the visuals are so great. I mean, I'm definitely a visual learner, but I think
Yeah.
most it's really easy to attach information to these visuals, especially the geography of wine, of course. And so
Yeah.
definitely use that when I can.
And have you done some traveling and some experiential learning, as in tasting and
Yeah,
drinking wine and on location?
for sure. I was in the Loire last year, which was magical.
Oh, fantastic.
That was the first region when I was first starting to study wine that piqued my attention, and I became obsessed. And so we went last year. We spent most of our time in Vouvray and Touraine and Montlouis, that sort of central Loire area.
Hmm.
It was magical. I mean, for me, I'm such a hands-on like learner, and so
Hmm.
to be there, to meet the winemakers, to see the land, made me understand their wine so much more.
Hmm.
And I have so many plans to travel more, but obviously, gotta wait that out.
Why the Loire? If you were going to France was it your first time?
Yes, yeah.
So why the Loire?
I
I
think
mean,
because
why not one of the big ones, bigger ones? I
there
know it's
was,
big.
yeah, originally there was a plan to go to Champagne, but I think the way our route was set up, because we were in the south of France as well, it kind of made sense to go there,
Okay.
sort of as far as like trip planning goes. But yeah, originally it was Champagne. Um, but I think there was that sort of kind of nostalgic connection to this region that piqued my interest in wine. And so I think it was more of like an emotional response. I wanted to be there to experience it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that uh, most somms do have that kind of experience in wine countries, you know, or don't? Like, what's more common, that they've traveled and been to places and tasted the wine there, or that they haven't?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of times there are organized tasting trips that a lot of sommeliers do. Or, you work a harvest, which is definitely something that I plan on doing.
I think
Um,
that's such a great idea. I
it's the
mean,
best. Yeah, talk
like,
about hands-on. I mean, that's
yeah. And
yeah.
also just learning. I mean, the other thing I would say, even for sommeliers, is I would love to see more sommeliers just even at home make some homebrew wine,
Oh,
just for the sake of knowing where some of the flavors and things come from in the, like seeing that whole process of like how it changes, how it tastes when it's fresh, how it tastes when it's, been settling in barrel or carboy or whatever vessel for, 6 months, and then how it tastes in bottle when you first bottle it versus a year later. I mean, that whole experience of the evolution of a single wine and all the things that can happen, all the things that you can do to change the flavor is so, I think, informative to people. I love that you've done a harvest. That's fantastic.
oh,
I feel like that's not common, or you haven't done. You want to do.
I want to, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, but I'm jumping ahead in your life.
Well,
Sorry.
thanks.
You should get a chance to live it. I apologize. But I hope you do. I mean, I think that is
Yeah,
really. I think it's just really good. I think it will revolutionize your understanding of wine.
I
Honestly,
agree.
like, just it really, you can't replicate that knowledge by book learning or even visiting and watching. See,
Right.
being there during a harvest, like actually every step in the process, working it is revolutionary, really.
Absolutely.
And you started talking about sulfites. I just wanted to go revisit that. So, is do you think that a lot of consumers just misunderstand sulfites and have a lot of misinformation about, you know, how they affect them personally and how important they are in wine? Or
Yeah, I think people get headaches from wine and they attribute it to the amount of sulfur in the wine,
right,
which,
yeah,
depending on the person is, I mean, I'm allergic to sulfa medication and I'm literally in the wine industry and I'm fine. So
yeah,
uh,
yep, yeah.
I think there is a misconception. Um,
I think, just for the record, I think if you're asthmatic, I think there's like 1% of asthmatics have an actual real sulfite allergy. And that, so obviously it's already a small percentage of the population. And then it's a very small percentage of that small percentage of the population.
mhm,
So it's highly likely, if you're getting a headache from wine, that has nothing to do with sulfites.
right. And I know that obviously I don't want to make them feel, you know, stupid or
Right,
anything. I think
right.
it's a better
It's
word.
a hard conversation to have.
It's a
Yeah,
hard conversation, yeah, and so I briefly touch on, that sulfites are naturally occurring, or I will, show them we have quite a few producers that add the minimum tiniest amount of sulfur at bottling, and that's it, and
right,
usually that appeases them. And I do have no sulfur wines, but I tell them that there are still naturally occurring ones. It's
right.
hard to avoid it completely, and so
Yeah,
they understand.
yeah, it's funny with, just was talking to a producer who can, like, has a certified organic winery, and so they can make organic wine, if they don't add sulfites, where they can actually write on the label organic wine. But they have been in circumstances a couple times where even when they don't add sulfites, the threshold rises above that 10 parts per million that it has to be below for them to say that without them even adding it. So the naturally occurring sulfites is too high for them to even meet the requirement. So they have to say, like, made with organic grapes, basically, instead of, organic wine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and I mean, you know more about this than I do, but how do you even really control that? I mean,
Right.
you can't.
Yeah, I know. Unless we come up with like a sulfite filtering process. I think that's probably not going to happen.
Probably.
um, uh, so, aside from these developments that clearly there are other paths to take depending on what your goals are as a sommelier. Like I said, I feel like sometimes Michelin starred restaurants or that sort of high end dining experience is so rarefied and so tense that it's not even pleasure bringing for me. Like, um, uh, it's an interesting thing. I know some people love it and want that, and that it's a special treat. But I personally am much more fond of Birdie G's and that experience, the experience that you guys provide. But my point is clearly there are different paths that you can take that
Mhm.
don't involve going through the quartermaster sommeliers. I mean, you did WSET, which isn't I mean, you can become a master of wine, but it's not like a specific service related uh, job,
Mhm.
maybe a certification. It's more like a diploma, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I've done the intros for both that and the court, so I have a little dabbling experience with both. But it's aside from those different paths, are there other things that you think that have been thought of as musts for sommeliers that are getting a little more lax or a little loosened, or people are beginning to realize it's less important for that career, for that job, that
Yeah,
you're
I
seeing a
mean,
changes?
right. I think it definitely depends on the business owner, of course. So, if a Michelin starred restaurant group, they require that for their employees in the wine department, obviously that's their prerogative. And there are super high end restaurants that are Michelin starred that may not. I mean, I think it depends on the opinion of the business owner, of course. Um, I think when you work wine retail, you don't necessarily require certification. And I've heard from colleagues of mine that they learned more working in wine retail than they did in their formal classes. So I think it just really depends on the way in which you learn best. Um, and my only experience is working here in Los Angeles. And of the few restaurants I've worked in, none of them required certification. So I don't know if it's city based, that maybe LA is just a little
Mhm.
more relaxed when it comes to these things. And maybe I've heard New York and San Francisco might be a little more concerned with your certification. It really just depends. But from what I've heard, LA is a little more, they ease up on that for the most
Did,
part.
didn't Michelin say that they weren't going to give any stars to LA based restaurants a little while ago? Is this a real thing?
Well, they
Is this a
came
rumor?
last year, I believe, and they
If,
did
but
award.
it was the first time in a long time, right?
I think since 1994. Yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe we've just developed a more of like a punk rock, like we don't need you kind of
yeah,
attitude here in LA.
yeah.
Like we're a little
That's
counterculture, like
that's
if you don't like us, we don't need you kind of thing.
right. I think that's definitely a valid theory, and I think it's a shame to assume that somebody doesn't know as much because they don't have certification. And I'm fortunate
Yeah.
for superiors that know that that's not the case. Um,
Yeah.
and I do get that question all the time. I think
Like
guests,
are you certified?
yeah, I know they're just making conversation,
Right.
but sometimes I wonder if it's like judging the experience or intellect that I have in the subject. I'm not sure, but I do think things are moving in a different direction.
Well, you brought up a good point. Have you faced prejudices or criticism based on any aspect of who you are, whether it's your, lack of that normal path of going through the court? Maybe it's not that normal anymore, but that certificate, that stamp, seal of approval kind of thing, or anything else. Like, have it's I know it's tough working with people in any capacity. So I imagine you have some interesting encounters.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, the thing is, I really, I think because I have this sort of friendly approach, and unfortunately, being a woman in this industry is not the easiest either. I think that is changing for the better, but so sometimes I do face a little bit of, oh, a female sommelier. Like people are like, oh, okay, and they're a little off put by the fact, or maybe because I'm very approachable. They mistake my enthusiasm and approach for lack of intellect or lack of experience. But, I realized when I did let it get to me, I realized, that is out of my control. The only thing I can do is be myself, and I'm confident in the knowledge and experience that I have, and I'm still gonna do a great job for you, whether or not you think I'm capable. So, but I'm fortunate that our clientele is so wonderful, and it's been very rare that I've had that experience.
Have you won anybody over who was initially sort of like harumph about working with you?
Yeah, I think the wine helps in that situation.
Few glasses in, they love you.
Yeah, I think ultimately maybe they're a little hangry when they first order their wine, and then
Mm,
couple
yeah.
a couple sips, it's okay. No,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
no, it
Uh,
actually that has not been a big issue for me. So yeah.
do you do you get to select the wines? I know you said Catherine is really like the wine director for the group. Do you get to participate in wine selection?
Yes, I am so fortunate that I'm also a buyer, so I
Oh,
will
yay.
do control what goes on and off the list. In an effort to maximize our time efficiently, pre-COVID, we would meet once a week, all of the somms for the restaurants in our group, and the
Mhm.
reps. I think 3 or 4 reps would come and do presentations to all of us. That way, we could be a little more efficient, and we try not to have the same wines by the glass on our lists to try to diversify each restaurant. So that also helps us get on the same page to make sure we're two somms aren't
Not duplicating
by the glass.
things.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Got it. So, what's your most exciting buy recently, or what have you been excited to bring to the restaurant?
Well, I haven't bought much recently,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How's it been going? What
um,
how
I think, yeah, I mean, obviously trying to be as conservative with our spending as much as possible until we have a better sense of what the landscape looks like for our industry.
Yeah.
So I'll sort of reference your question to pre-COVID purchases, but one wine I was super excited to bring on was Premier Cru Champagne from Jen Pelka. She owns the Riddler Champagne Bar in San Francisco and New York.
Okay.
She basically sought out to make organic Premier Cru champagne that was entirely produced by women, distributed and funded by women. So
Wow.
he sought out Juliette from Gonnet Medvi, who they produce our champagne by the glass already, and yeah, they created Une Femme, which is
Mm.
a line that is all of their wines will be funded, produced, and distributed by women, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's of course it's gorgeous champagne, and so I was really excited to bring that on. Obviously, as a female sommelier, I try to promote as many female producers as I can. And the wine is called the Juliet, so she names them after the woman who made it.
Lovely.
Yeah.
That's such a great story. Do you and how has it been received? How have customers received it?
Oh, it's so great because it's so celebratory. I mean, a lot of times, like I was going to promote it for Mother's Day, but unfortunately, we were closed due to COVID. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
anytime there's a gathering, specifically usually of women, or I had a graduation celebration. It was a father with his 2 daughters who were celebrating their graduation, and I told them about this wine, and he was like, "Oh, absolutely! It's exactly the perfect wine for the celebration of my 2 daughters graduating." So it was
Uh,
really it's been really well received. I mean,
that's
yeah,
fantastic.
it's
Can
the
people buy Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Can people buy whole bottles from the restaurant at this point?
Now we can, yes, we have
Okay.
a retail license, so we are offering that as well.
Did did you have to get a retail license during this quarantine time? Or
I'm
did they open the license that you had to retail sales?
Yeah, I think it was more the latter.
Okay, that's what I
I'm not
thought.
sure it's a permanent situation. I was not involved in that, unfortunately, but I'm I'm pretty sure it's a temporary situation just to kind of help out during these
Yeah.
unprecedented times.
Yeah. Wow.
We also have like a sidewalk license now, so people can drink wine on the sidewalk and cocktails and stuff. So
So if you were giving your younger self advice about um, getting into this business, what have you learned that you wish you knew, 5 years ago?
Hmm. Ooh, that's such a great question. I would say it took me a while to realize this, but to just be yourself.
Mm,
I know that sounds kind of trite, but I think I had an idea of what a sommelier should be,
mm,
and I was fortunate to see that there is another way that you can just be yourself. You don't have to follow the same path that everyone did. You can learn in the way that works best for you. And if you are authentic in that, people will gravitate toward you and they'll understand your methods. And I I think that once I realized that other people's opinions were out of my control, I think it really helped me press on.
yeah, that sounds like a great piece of advice for any industry,
Yeah,
wine or otherwise.
that's true.
I love that.
I also think I would tell myself to buy wine that I actually like. It doesn't matter what other people think about it.
Mm. Well, what do you like these days?
Think,
What
like,
are you excited about?
oh my gosh, yeah, so many things. um, so I mean, pre-COVID mostly, but I had been taking a deep dive into Galicia since I have history there. My family lives there. I wanted to
Oh,
better understand the wine region since I knew so little about Spanish wine, and do plan to make a trip for
oh, me too.
professional reasons. Yeah,
Seriously, if totally professional reasons.
yeah. um, but yeah, I mean, I've kind of been researching sort of the biodynamic practices of the Ribera Sacra, and I fell in love with Laura Lorenzo's wines from Doterra, and she makes this 100% Palomino, which I didn't even know what that grape was, to be honest with you. And so I,
Isn't that what they use in sherry?
yeah,
One of the grapes that they use in
hmm
sherry?
yeah, um, and she makes a still Palomino that is just so exotic and aromatic and so much
Ooh.
salinity and just a couple hours of skin contact. So it,
Oh,
it's unique without being kind of like over the top barnyardy.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Without having to change, like to turn your head upside down to be able
Right,
to
exactly. Like,
understand it.
rustic, but it's also so bright and fresh. And my first kind of dive into this grape, besides
Wow.
or this style of winemaking with this grape. So, and I've always been obsessed with Etna too. I just
Oh,
there's something
you
so
and me both.
about
Oh,
the fact
wow.
that
I'm surprised we haven't talked about it.
I know,
Should we
right?
talk about it? Oh my gosh. I've been to Etna.
Oh
I
my god.
I can't I will tell you, if you go to Etna, stay in Taormina, which is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's on the Mediterranean coast there, right at the base of Mount Etna, where there is a 2,000-year-old Greek and then later Roman amphitheater that's huge. Like, it would have set 1,000 people, and the backdrop to the stage is the smoldering Mount Etna. Like, it would be like if you were acting, you would be upstaged by the erupting volcano at times. Like, and you're like 500 feet up over the Mediterranean, on cliffs over the Mediterranean. It is just stunning. And the whole town is on the hills, on the cliffs. So there's stairways connecting the streets, because it's pretty much just like one main pedestrian street that's sort of like the third street promenade, but obviously Italian style, very narrow and
Mhm.
charming and
Mhm.
ancient. And then you have to walk up steps, like to the
Oh,
next street above, and down steps to the next street below. It is
sounds
just, you
magical.
got to go.
Yeah.
And the when you're up on the volcano tasting the wine, it's magical. I mean, it's the Italian way to do it too, is like you might get one tasting in an afternoon, because you're going to sit there and you're going to have cheese and charcuterie, and then sausages and beans, and they're going to leave the bottle on your table. So you're going to look around and be like, can we just have more? And you're going to be like, yes, we can just have more.
Oh,
And
yes, that is next on the bucket list for sure.
uh
That sounds
yeah, it is really beautiful. And I actually recommend going in the off season, because there's never a bad time there. And
mm,
coming from LA, I think traveling during rainy seasons is, for Europe, there's fewer tourists, and we don't get rain here anyway, so it's kind of like a refreshing change.
yeah.
um anyway, those are my inside tips for
Um,
visiting Sicily,
Thank you.
especially Etna. Yeah. But yeah, okay. So Etna, obviously. What else? What else?
Ooh, what else? I don't know. I don't.
Who on Etna have you encountered that you've gotten excited about?
Frank Cornelissen, obviously,
Yeah,
has been kind of. There's just so much to unpack there, and so I really wanted to
yeah,
dive in. And faux tea, of course. I had his Aurora at Bianco, which was so pretty and just kind of transported me in a time where I was stuck in my apartment, which is another amazing thing about wine. um,
that's nice.
yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
is a nice thing. Now, do you find people at the restaurant are ordering more of red or white or rosé these days? Is there a trend that you've seen, or does it
I
depend on the season in LA?
For sure. I mean, I think summertime definitely brings out a lot more white wine and rosé
Hmm.
than in the fall. But red wine always wins. I have to say,
Yeah,
just across the board, and that's
yeah,
our food does seem like, oh, this is really rich. I need red wine, but a lot of times it's it seems rich, but it's not. And so I try my best to kind of like push people in different directions, um, but yeah, it seems to be that red wine still is the winner.
So you mentioned that unusual pairing of, I mean, it's not unusual once you understand it, but the rosé of Syrah with the lamb, the way that you make it there at the restaurant.
Mhm.
What's some of the more surprising pairings that you've had that just worked really well?
Mhm.
Just going back to the,
We have these amazing lavender almonds. That's
mhm.
one of our
Ooh,
kind of staple dishes that Chef Jeremy has been cooking, or not cooking, has been preparing at um, a lot of his restaurants. And we
mhm.
had by the glass for a while this gorgeous sparkling rosé of Nebbiolo, uh,
Oh, wow.
which was the most perfect pairing. I swear, I could. The lavender just sprouted out of that glass.
Wow.
It was gorgeous.
Oh,
Yeah,
that sounds
from this
incredible.
really wonderful producer that actually mostly produces Erbeluce, um, the Favaro family, which is just
Okay.
like, they rehabilitated this grape that was dying. But this particular sparkling rosé was fantastic. Let's see what else. Um, oh, I have this really nice Kerner from Alto Adige.
I think that's the one I obsessed over when I
Oh,
was last there.
yeah. Clearly I am too. I'm already talking about it again. Yeah, that one's really nice. We have this almost like Thai inspired um, prawn dish that has like a coconut curry sort of feel to it in the gazpacho, and these like really ripe sweet melons and lemongrass and chili flakes. So there's just like a lot of flavors going on. Um, and that has just enough weight and just enough aromatics, but it's still dry. Um,
Yeah.
but a
Yeah,
ton of residual
that
sugar
was
left just to cover that little spice. It's so wild. It's so good.
man, I thought that Kerner went great with everything, honestly. Like I hadn't had a white that paired so well with like, you know, I mean, well, definitely the pork dish. I forget what that was, but
Mhm.
like several things, even like the lamb. It was crazy. It was just it
I
had
tell my servers that it's one of the most food friendly wines on the menu right now, and will definitely kind of carry you through. We had this, oh, it just came to me. We had this amazing blood sausage dish. And you hear those words,
the
blood sausage.
morcilla or the morcilla.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. We
oh
changed it recently. So we took the morcilla and we added this like cherry mustard and pickled mulberries and this like Treviso sauerkraut. Um, and so you think like, oh, you need this like really intense, big wine with this. And it was such an umami dish that I was like, I can't put anything too intense next to this. And I had this chilled red from Michael Cruz, his like Val de Gay Carignan. It's called the
mm.
Monkey Jacket Red Blend. And it
What jacket?
Monkey Jacket,
Monkey jacket red
old
blend. Okay.
Navy sailor song that
Okay.
it named after. And it had just like right amount of acidity and the right amount of grip. And it was still so fresh and did not distract from the umami of that dish. And it was like, people would order it and be like, this is what you want to drink with this. And they're like, and I was like, no, I promise you. So I'd put it in front of them and they were like, oh, wow. This is so great. Yeah, it was really exciting.
Oh man, again, making me hungry. That sounds fantastic. That sounds great.
That dish is no longer available. I'm sorry, everyone.
Ah.
Yeah.
um, well, last question or so. What's your what big ideas have you been geeking out on lately?
Like in what context? Like,
I mean, wine generally, but related to your job, related to, I mean, I haven't brought up like blind tasting, but I think I've talked to you about that in the past in my,
yeah.
but something like that. Is there a topic that relates to sommeliers or
Mhm.
wine in general, or anything that you've been just wanting to learn more about, or you have really strong opinion about right now?
Yeah, I guess definitely the blind tasting thing. I don't know. I'm with you. I feel it, I guess it's just a personal opinion, obviously, but I don't. I think it's fun. Is really what
Right.
it's kind of like a little game. Like what can I
It
pull
is.
out of this?
Yeah.
And I do think it absolutely helps with your palate and being objective.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
And
it's
uh,
not really that important to me.
yeah, obviously it helps with your deductive analysis of wine. I guess, yeah, my biggest complaints are like, how does it, like you said, your job, my first question to you, and you're like, my job is to sell wine. And there's so much emphasis put on blind tasting for sommeliers, especially in the court's certification process,
Right.
that I really don't see how all that time and energy and resources that is invested in that helps you sell wine at the end of the day. I mean,
Yeah, totally. I
I
think it's definitely a personal experience because you have to do that to become a master sommelier. So I think that's why so much blind tasting happens.
mhm.
But yeah, I generally approach it as something just almost competitive, like kind of fun, like how
Yeah,
and it happens with guests sometimes. They'll tell me, "Can you just bring me a glass of something with this?" And
yeah.
I'll set it down, and they'll be like, "Let me try to guess what it is." And I'm like, all right. Yeah. So I think I don't know. I look at it that way, which I don't want to obviously deflect its importance for other people. I don't, it's just a personal sort of, I don't really do much.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and the only extent, like I honestly could care less if you love doing blind tasting, want to be the best
Right.
blind taster in the world. I just feel like if you, again, going back to sort of the non-traditional path, I feel like the more effective way to become good at tableside sales of wine would be, A, to learn people skills, and B, to go work some harvests and make your own wine and really get a sense of what wine is from that holistic perspective,
Absolutely.
um
And
and
like I said before, like to use those words that people can understand, like instead of using these esoteric tasting notes, which when you're blind tasting is important because you are trying to, identify the subtle nuances of this wine. But typically in my uh, role in the restaurant, like that doesn't usually bring me any success. The more kind of esoteric I am, the more I lose them.
yeah, yeah. um well, that's lovely. What would you like to promote? Do you want people to be able to get in touch with you? Is there an Instagram channel? Is
Sure.
there is there anything you'd like to promote?
Sure. Well, you can follow Birdie G's LA on
Uh-huh.
Instagram, and you'll see some of the delicious food I discussed, and some of the wine pairings for those dishes. You can follow me on my personal Instagram. Anytime I put a new wine on the list, I post about it with some facts and fun facts and what I would pair it with and things like that. So yeah, I will say my Instagram's a little politically charged at the moment, so just a warning. But it is interspersed with uh, delicious wine, I promise. So my Instagram handle is Chlograms. So it's CHLO _GRAMS.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chloe, so much for doing this. It has been super pleasure to talk
Yeah,
and
same. Thank you for
learn
having
more about you. And thank you for sharing about all the stuff that I think is really fascinating.
me. I agree. Great talking with you. And I can't wait till you and your wife come back one of these days.
We can't be there.
Yeah.